In chapter 12, we walked with Abram through the trials of Egypt, a chapter that reminded us how even great people of faith can stumble when fear takes the wheel. Abram's journey through Pharaoh's land taught us that trusting God's promises means holding on to faith, even when circumstances look impossible. We saw how fear leads to compromise, but grace always leads us home. God didn't abandon Abram, even when Abram's faith wavered. Instead, he used the experience to refine his heart and to remind him that the God who calls is the same God who restores. And now, as we open the next part of Abram's story, we step into Genesis chapter 13. A story not of famine or failure, but of faith maturing through relationships. This time, Abram doesn't face kings or plagues. Instead, he faces something far more common: conflict within family. It's a quieter test, but perhaps a deeper one. Because sometimes the hardest battles aren't fought against enemies, but against pride, ego, and the desire to be right. Abram, Sarai, Lot, and all their herds and servants had returned from Egypt richer than before. God had blessed them immensely. But blessing, as we soon learn, can become a burden when it's not handled with humility. Their flocks multiplied, their herdsmen increased, and soon the land couldn't sustain them both. The open plains that once felt endless suddenly seemed too small for two prosperous families. The air began to fill with tension, herdsmen arguing over water, over grass, over whose flock should graze first. Abram must have watched this with a heavy heart. He had already seen how strife could destroy nations. He wasn't about to let it destroy his family. The Bible doesn't tell us that Abram prayed before acting, but his calm and measured words to Lot show a man whose faith had deepened since Egypt. He had learned that peace with God must overflow into peace with others. So one day, perhaps standing under the open sky with the hills of Bethel in the distance, Abram turned to Lot and said, "Let there be no quarrel between you and me, for we are brothers." You can almost hear the gentleness in his voice. It wasn't the tone of an older man asserting authority, but of a humble leader seeking harmony. Abram knew something many of us forget: that relationships are worth more than real estate. He valued peace over property. So instead of commanding, he offered Lot the choice. "If you go to the left, I'll go to the right. If you go to the right, I'll go to the left." That single act of selflessness spoke volumes. Abram didn't have to fight for what God had already promised him. His confidence wasn't in the land, but in the Lord of the land. Lot, however, looked around and saw the lush valley of the Jordan stretching out before him. Fertile, green, almost too good to be true. The Bible describes it as being like the garden of the Lord, like the land of Egypt. Lot's eyes sparkled with opportunity. He saw prosperity, comfort, and plenty. And so, without hesitation, he chose the valley near Sodom, leaving the drier hill country for his uncle. It looked like a smart business move. But not every green field leads to a good harvest. Lot's decision was based on sight, not faith, on profit, not purpose. He didn't ask where God wanted him. He went where the ground looked richest. How many times do we do the same thing? We make decisions because they look right on paper, because everyone else is doing it, or because it promises quick gain. We choose jobs, relationships, and paths that glitter, only to find out later that what glitters can also blind. Lot's choice teaches us that sometimes the most dangerous place isn't the desert, but the comfort zone. When everything looks easy, we stop listening for God's direction. Meanwhile, Abram stayed in Canaan, the less appealing option from a worldly perspective. But Abram knew something Lot didn't: that what you keep with God will always outlast what you gain without him. After Lot departed, there must have been a moment of quiet. The camp of Abram likely felt emptier, the sound of his nephew's laughter fading in the distance. Letting go is never easy, especially when it's someone you love. Yet it was in that moment of separation that God spoke again. God told Abram to lift up his eyes and look north, south, east, and west. "All the land that you see I will give to you and your descendants forever." It's as if God was saying, "You've trusted me enough to give away what looked best, now watch me give you what truly is best." That's a powerful truth. Sometimes the blessings of obedience only come after the pain of letting go. God waited until Abram released Lot before reaffirming his promise. Because as long as Abram was sharing his focus, his destiny was divided. God had to separate him before he could expand him. There's a lesson there for all of us. Separation isn't always punishment, sometimes it's preparation. When God removes certain people or things from our path, it's not rejection, it's redirection. Abram obeyed God's voice and began to walk through the land, surveying the promise. He didn't question or argue, he simply believed. And as he walked, he built another altar, his fourth one so far, a quiet symbol of worship and gratitude. Every time God spoke, Abram responded with worship. He didn't build monuments to himself. He built reminders of God's faithfulness. That's what makes his faith so beautiful. It wasn't loud or dramatic. It was steady, humble, and consistent. Meanwhile, Lot pitched his tent near Sodom, a city that already had a reputation for wickedness. At first, he stayed near it. Later, we'll find that he moved inside it. That's how sin works. It doesn't pull you all at once. It invites you to settle nearby. You don't wake up in Sodom. You walk there slowly. It's like someone saying, "I'm not really doing anything wrong, I'm just around it." But eventually, what you stay close to starts shaping you. Abram, on the other hand, chose distance from corruption and closeness with God. And that's why, even though Lot took the greener grass, Abram received the greater promise. Let's pause here for a moment to see the real-world reflection. Maybe you've been in a situation where someone took advantage of your kindness. You gave them the first choice, the better opportunity, the easier path, and they took it. You watched them walk away, seemingly thriving, while you were left with less. But later you realized that what they gained in speed, you gained in substance. God was positioning you for something permanent while they were chasing something temporary. That's the difference between Lot's vision and Abram's vision. Lot looked at what was visible. Abram trusted what was invisible. And the Bible reminds us in 2 Corinthians 5 verse 7 that we walk by faith, not by sight. Lot's decision led him towards Sodom, a place that looked like paradise but turned out to be poison. Abram's decision led him toward God's promise, a place that looked barren but became the birthplace of blessing. It's almost humorous when you think about how Lot must have strutted away that day, proud of his cleverness. Maybe his herdsmen whispered, "Our master got the best deal." They couldn't see that the best land without God is still empty. Abram's humility, on the other hand, set him apart. He wasn't driven by greed or image. He could have said, "Lot, you're my nephew and I'm older. I should choose first." But Abram had learned the art of surrender. And when you've surrendered to God, you no longer have to fight for your position. That's something we all need to remember. When you know God is your source, you don't panic when others seem to get ahead. You don't fight for the front seat when you know God controls the vehicle. As Abram built his altar, he was quietly declaring, "I don't need the best valley because I have the best promise." There's also something subtle here about the nature of faith. Abram's faith wasn't about waiting for everything to look right. It was about trusting even when everything looked ordinary. That's real maturity, worshiping not because of what you see, but because of who God is. Think of how practical that lesson is today. Maybe you're at a job that feels like the dry hill country, while others around you seem to flourish in the green valleys. Maybe your progress feels slow, your resources limited, your prayers unanswered. But remember Abram's story. God's promises aren't measured by appearances. What looks small today might be the foundation of something eternal. Now let's reflect on another layer of this story: family relationships. Abram and Lot weren't enemies. They were kin. Yet even among loved ones, conflict can arise. But look at how Abram handled it. With peace, generosity, and wisdom. He didn't let wealth destroy family ties. In our world today, people fight over land, inheritance, and positions. Brothers stop talking because of property lines. Friends fall apart over business deals. But Abram shows us that peace is always more valuable than possessions. Imagine this scene in modern times. Two brothers inherit a family business. One says, "Let's split it. You take the branch in town, I'll take the one in the countryside." The other, seeing that the town branch makes more money, quickly agrees. Years later, a storm hits the city and destroys the urban branch. The brother in the countryside, meanwhile, grows slowly but steadily. That's Abram's wisdom, choosing peace and patience over greed and speed. Abram didn't just win the moral victory. He set the foundation for generational blessing. Lot, on the other hand, gained immediate comfort but long-term chaos. His choice led him toward Sodom, a place that would one day be destroyed. Abram's choice led him to Hebron, where he would later be called the friend of God. If we look closely, we can see that this chapter isn't really about land at all. It's about loyalty, humility, and trust. It's about learning that God's timing and placement are always perfect, even when they don't make sense in the moment. So what does this mean for us as Christians today? It means learning to trust the unseen hand of God when life forces us to make tough choices. It means valuing people over possessions and peace over pride. It means being okay with saying, "You choose first," because we know our blessing doesn't depend on human fairness, it depends on divine favor. If you're walking through a season where you've had to let go of something, maybe a friendship, a business deal, or even a dream, don't see it as loss. See it as preparation. Like Abram, God might be calling you to stand still so he can show you the greater land ahead. And remember, sometimes the valley you give up is the valley God saves you from. When Abram looked out over Canaan after Lot's departure, he saw not just land, but destiny. The dust beneath his feet would one day belong to his descendants. The stars above him, though he couldn't count them yet, whispered of a promise too vast for human eyes. That's the reward of trusting God fully. He turns what looks ordinary into something eternal. Folded hands prayer. Lord, thank you for teaching us through Abram's example. Help us to trust you even when we can't see the full picture. Teach us to choose peace over pride, faith over fear, and obedience over opportunity. When we face moments of separation, remind us that you never take without intending to bless. Give us wisdom like Abram, patience in waiting, and humility in all we do. In Jesus' name, amen.